Amazon has been in full panic mode with the Rings of Power, and there's a very good reason for that. It's not just because the audience has rejected it, because if the audience were shitting on it, but it was still drawing people in at a really high rate, they'd probably be okay with it. But that is not the case. There's a reason they went out there and gaslit the fan base to try to say, well, it's just racists that don't like this. There's a reason the media is out there writing hit pieces against people that are rejecting Rings of Power. There's a reason they hid their reviews for 7 days on their website and then stacked the deck on their own site, trying to delete so many one-star reviews in front of our very eyes, as well as manipulated the IMDb reviews. Oh, by the way, they own IMDb. The truth is, people are not watching this series, and it's not just that they're not watching it in compared to something like House of the Dragon, which has got way better audience feedback and is dominating the streaming numbers right now. No, it's not just because of that. It's because according to some reports that are out there from various sources, it's even getting beat by something like She-Hulk, something that has been mocked, something that has been laughed at by so many people. Even She-Hulk is potentially outdrawing the Rings of Power. I've said multiple times, She-Hulk is one of the worst shows on TV, except for Rings of Power. If Rings of Power didn't exist, then it might hold that title, but Rings of Power is far worse than even She-Hulk. And when we look at some of these new reports that are out there, that's what other people are saying too, that people just are not tuning in to Lord of the Rings of Power. Now, this report is coming to us from Whip Media in association with TV Time. And I will say, before we dig too into it, I'm a little bit skeptical of how they're coming to the decisions for some of these. They also don't attach any type of numbers to them at all, but I want to look at them, then we'll discuss Whip Media and TV Time. Right now, they're saying that last week, She-Hulk was the #1 streamed original across all platforms. Keep in mind, this does not include something like House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon, just like we saw with Game of Thrones, since it airs on HBO at the same time, it technically counts as an acquired series as opposed to an original series. If it wasn't here, that would by far and away, by all metrics, be the top streamed thing right now. But according to this report, She-Hulk is the top thing, followed by the series premiere of Andor. So this would have been when the 3 episodes came out of Andor, followed by Cobra Kai, followed by Dahmer, followed by Lord of the Rings of Power. Now, once again, I'm a little skeptical of some of these, specifically the Netflix numbers, because if you look at Netflix through that same period, they're actually telling you that Dahmer, by like far and away, was the most watched in terms of minutes viewed. Maybe this is tracking something different than minutes viewed. Maybe it's people clicking. I don't know. Again, a little bit skeptical of this because they're not showing us numbers and because they're not super 100%. Hey, this is how we got to these decisions. This is why we ranked it this way. And in general, just based on what we've seen and the crazy numbers that Dahmer is doing, this is a weird aberration that doesn't make any sense. Not only for it to be ranked below Cobra Kai, but also that it's not top there. That's one of the things that does make me question exactly where they're getting some of these numbers. But when you look at Rings of Power compared to She-Hulk, especially compared to House of Dragon, this is not the only place where it looks like She-Hulk might be getting more traction than Rings of Power. When the Parrot Analytics report came out and showed the demand for House of the Dragon, She-Hulk was also on this list. Metrics indicate House of the Dragon interest is near double the Rings of Power. Well, also, Lord of the Rings was less than something like She-Hulk. Again, at Parrot Analytics, you have to kind of take it as it goes. You have to understand what it is. It's not necessarily people that are talking good about a show. It's just people that are talking about a show. So even if people are shitting on a show, that will still go into Parrot Analytics. But nonetheless, She-Hulk Attorney at Law is still above the Lord of the Rings of Power. If this is true, if all this plays out and all of it actually does make sense, maybe when we see the Nielsen ratings finally for Rings of Power, we'll get a little bit better understanding because those actually are tangible numbers. We can actually see things like that in terms of minutes watched according to Nielsen. Maybe we'll have a better understanding. But according to a couple different places now, if Amazon's Lord of the Rings of Power, $1 billion series, $1 billion for 2 seasons of this, $700 million just on this 1 season alone. If this is true, then this is a fucking disaster for Amazon. It's one thing to get beat by House of the Dragon. It's another thing to put that much money into something, this big, epic fantasy story. Tolkien. Well, we know it's not Tolkien. It's bastardized. That's why people are rejecting it. But if you can't even beat She-Hulk Attorney at Law on Disney Plus, than Amazon. It's no wonder they're in full breakdown, full panic mode. And when we do look at some things that we saw earlier for both of their premieres, there is potential that these numbers could be true. At least these rankings could be true in terms of She-Hulk and in terms of Rings of Power. Remember when Samba TV came out and told us 1.5 million over the first 4 days? Wasn't a great number, was less than a lot of other Disney Plus Marvel premieres with the exception of Miss Marvel. That wasn't great news for Disney at the time. Well, compare that number to what we saw with Rings of Power. 1.8 million over the same time period for Rings of Power, but only 1.3 stayed around for episode 2. We talked about that big drop-off of people that had no interest in watching episode 2. According to Amazon, or according to Samba, viewership for Rings of Power's second episode is 28% lower, as only 1.3 million households gave it a go after watching episode 1. 1.3. So if She-Hulk's holding a little better in Rings of Power, this might make sense. All these things might be completely and totally true when you take paired analytics, when you take this whip media thing, all of that. It just continues to get worse and worse for Lord of the Rings of Power. The worst show on TV. If you take away all the lore bastardization, if you take away all the references to Tolkien, it's still the worst thing on TV. It is completely and totally incompetent in all ways, whether you're talking effects, whether you're talking about dialogue, whether you're talking about writing, story, pacing, everything. The Rings of Power is awful. And according to a lot of different places now, nobody's watching it. That is a big problem for Amazon. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for watching, everyone. And a huge shout out to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram? Check out the description below. You'll find links to my P.O. box and my Patreon as well. And I'll talk to you guys later.